It was Christmas Eve, 1991. Not just any Christmas, though. Anticipation was in the air, and my mother handed me this big box of a present. I opened my present, and there it was, a Nintendo Entertainment System. My only memories of games before this was playing a text adventure on my father's job computer, and some football game on maybe an Amiga. I remember the TAC-2 joystick. But this Christmas present was to be the real kickoff to my gaming life. As soon as I saw that it was indeed a Nintendo in there, my child brain snapped and I ran up to the attic, crying. My mother went up after me, hugged me and asked why I was crying. Wasn't this what I wanted? My crying changed to the more appropriate cheer, and I said, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. The Nintendo also came bundled with my first game, Super Mario Bros. 3. I was playing it that very night. The colors, the movement. Then I picked up a leaf and watched in surprise as Mario got a tail. This was the beginning of many wonders. As I engrossed myself in the world of Mario, my mother too would have to adjust. One time when she called for dinner, I was playing Mario 3, and I yelled back, "Sure, I just gotta die first." She came running in, worried. I explained that I meant I had to die in the game. This was apparently also before I knew that pressing start pauses the game. I was afraid of stage 4 when I was a kid. The screen moved on its own. Platforms fell down into the abyss when I stepped on them. I rarely played it back then. I also used to play 2-player with my sister from time to time, and while I learned to play the game up to World 4, she got perpetually stuck on the first world's castle. She never quite learned proper use of the B button. That and fear of lava prevented her from going much further. During my Nintendo years, I would get these games to my collection. Tiger Heli, Gremlins 2, Tecmo World Wrestling, The Simpsons, Bart vs. the World, Shadowgate, and Anticipation. Super Mario Bros. 3 was my favorite game then, and now too actually. I enjoyed all my games to varying degrees, but Tiger Heli was the one I liked the least. The music, apart from the beginning, got on my nerves, and of course dying all the time also got to me. Gremlins 2 was also very hard, but much more fun. To this day I think this is one of the best movie licensed games. The graphics are great, and the music too. It had cinematic scenes like Ninja Gaiden, although maybe not as creative. I think the guy in the beginning looks like David Hasselhoff. Tecmo World Wrestling was fun, but I realize now it's mostly a button masher. I could rarely read Swedish back then, but I still enjoy the commentator, how he stood up sometimes when something interesting happened. Bart vs. the World I liked too, but I could never get past the first North Pole stage. I didn't realize back then how bad the controls were. But I still think that the Great Wall of China was a fun level. I never had that much trouble with the dragon. I just enjoyed going fast and jumping high. I got Shadowgate when I had asked for that and Solstice, which both had a special deal getting sold together. The companies selling them were out of Solstice, but I did get Shadowgate, the Swedish version. Today I find it really odd that there existed a Swedish version at all. I remember not getting very far, and getting very scared of the game. The Banshee, the Fire Dragon you can only see the eyes of, and the Grim Reaper that you get to see each time you die. Later on, when I rediscovered Nintendo games on emulator, I beat Shadowgate, and now I know it inside and out. Ask me anytime, and I can tell you each step you take through it. To this day, I've never played Solstice. Anticipation was the last game I got. I think my mother may have gotten persuaded by the wholesome cover. Actually, my mother bought me all my games growing up. Anyway, Anticipation was a hard game to play back then since it was in English. But later on I grew an appreciation for it. It's Pictionary, and it's fun. The neighbor kid, my best friend at the time, also had a Nintendo. His parents had a lot of money, I suppose, because he had many games. He had Super Mario 1 and 2, Ice Hockey, Blades of Steel, Nintendo World Cup, Ice Climber, Castlevania, Metroid, Turtles 2, Duck Hunt, Tetris, Zelda 1. That gold cartridge immediately caught my eye, and it felt legendary just putting it in my Nintendo. I also remember being mystified at a blue candle? What in the world? We had some great fun with Nintendo World Cup, and as I recall he did have an NES satellite. But we could never find 2 more friends to play with. The other neighbor kids were jerks, as I recall, and didn't have any good NES games either. One of them had Knight Rider, which looked cool until I tried it. The 2 games I ended up borrowing from him the most, apart from Mario 1 and 2 of course, was Mega Man and Mega Man 2. Mega Man was great, but Mega Man 2 became the game I wished I had myself the most. I borrowed it from him many times. I thought it was so cool how you could use the weapons that the bosses used, and how Mega Man changed color with each new weapon. Speaking of the colors, I remember thinking that the pink while using Quickman's weapon was girly, especially since Quickman was the coolest of the Robot Masters. And I wanted Crashman's weapons colors to be red, not light pink. Too bad red was reserved for the items. And like everyone else, I thought the Metal Blade was the best weapon. There's just no debate there. I still remember the password to Dr. Wily's castle to this day. A5, B2, B4, C1, C3, C5, D4, D5, E2. I remember Wily waggling his eyebrows, his skull castle, getting so scared of the robot dragon that I always fell off the platforms. The neighbor kid eventually got Mega Man 3 too, but I didn't get to play it much. Shortly thereafter he moved away to his father, who apparently had a Super Nintendo. I was jealous. About Mega Man 3, I remember thinking Top Man had to be the most difficult boss, since he was the top man. Little did I know that he's actually the easiest. The neighbor kid didn't have Super Mario Bros. 3 though, which gave me one little advantage, and a reason for him to come over to my house every once in a while. One time when he came over, to play football actually, I was trying to beat the ship level in World 8, and I kept dying. I refused to give up though, and I had plenty of lives. So I kept telling him to wait, and that I just have to finish this level first. Time passed, and before I knew it, he had to go home. It was getting late, and I still hadn't beaten that level. I felt bad for neglecting him for quite some time afterwards. Another story relating to Mario 3 was when I got to take over the family's TV set because we'd bought a new one. I went from playing on a 14-inch to a 28-inch. It was massive, and I immediately brought a bunch of kids over to watch me and my friend play Mario 3. But after only a couple of hours, the TV began to flicker, then make noises, then it shut off. It was broken. Happiness is fleeting. The following Christmas I got a Game Boy and Super Mario Land. A great game, and it introduced me to that lovely tune, Can Can. Later I got to buy another game for it, and I remember being at the toy store and choosing between Alleyway and Quirk. I ended up choosing Quirk, which would be my only other Game Boy game for years and years. Quirk is a decent game. Quirk, he's amazing. The only other game I played on Game Boy back in the day was Tetris, that I borrowed from someone, I don't remember who. Me and my sister used to play it and beat each other's high score with each play session. Classic game. I still have my old Game Boy, which is more than I could say about my Nintendo, unfortunately. In 1994 my parents divorced and my Nintendo started malfunctioning, glitching and sometimes refusing to start. The last game I played on it was Panic Restaurant that I borrowed from a classmate, who had since turned to computers. I was about to do that myself. Anyway, I left my Nintendo at my father's house, and then I forgot about it while I moved on to other things. And some years later, my father moved to another city. Years later, I asked him about where my Nintendo was, and he said, kind of vaguely, that it must have gotten lost in the move. Right. Most likely he threw it away, thinking I don't play with it anymore. It feels quite sad today that I'll never see it again. I could buy another one any day, but it wouldn't be the same. So, that was the first section of my gaming life, 1991 to 1994, which I called the NES age. As you might have guessed by now, I remember it fondly. And I still like the side-scrolling platformers and Mario games the most. It's also funny how my very first game also became my all-time favorite. The year was 1994. My parents were divorced and I wasn't playing with my NES that much anymore. I still had my Game Boy though. I didn't play games that much as real-life football took over. That was until 1996 when we were visiting my mother's friend and her son showed me Duke Nukem 3D. Duke Nukem made me want a computer, and luck would necessitate it. Extreme luck, actually. In the fall of 1996 I was at a store with my mother and sister and I was going through the rubbish bins looking for scratch and win tickets that people might have forgotten, and in retrospect slightly embarrassing hobby. But this day I picked up a ticket that had 100,000 crowns in winnings on it. For reference, that's 10,000 euro or 14,300 US dollars. I flipped out, of course, took the ticket to the cashier to check if it was valid, and it was. Someone had actually scratched it, looked at it, and thought there was no winnings on it, and thrown it away. Lucky me, right? In fact, I think I used up all my life's cumulative luck on that one occasion. Anyway, part of the money was used to buy me a brand new computer. My computer was a Pentium 166 with 16 megabytes of RAM, 2 megabyte graphics card, and 8-speed CD. My schoolmates helped me get some of my first games for it. The early days of my PC era was mainly spent with first-person shooters. Duke Nukem 3D was the big one, of course, then Doom and Wolfenstein 3D. I remember the lottery of booting up Wolfenstein 3D and hoping the AdLib/Sound Blaster kicked in. Playing it with PC speaker was unbearable. Doom was great, and still is. The chainsaw is beyond awesome, and I think the Doom guy is definitely the best Space Marine ever. I mean, he literally fought through hell and back. As the game says, he was too tough for hell to contain. The music is great, some of it is very metal. I didn't know at the time that some of the songs are rip-offs of Pantera songs. I think that makes it all the better though. A little later on, I got Quake. I remember in school when the talk shifted from Duke Nukem 3D being the best to Quake. Also, the PC Gamer magazines I was reading were all ecstatic about the full 3D graphics, and sites and magazines still bring that up today when talking about Quake. Now don't get me wrong, it was a milestone and all, and a great game, but I always thought the Duke Nukem 3D looked better. More colors than brown and red, for example. Anyway, what I'll remember Quake for is running around with the axe on quad damage and hacking the grunts to pieces. Some of the other FPSs I want to mention are Rise of the Triad, which I remember for the digitized enemies, and the Ride code, with which you could follow rockets to their bloody goal. Redneck Rampage, which I remember for its fun levels in hillbilly towns, and how you would whack the brother with a crowbar to finish levels. And Blood. I live again. Which introduced me to the rest in pieces joke, kicking zombie heads around, and the voodoo doll, one of the coolest weapons ever. One time pretty early on, when I had only had the PC for maybe 6 months, I thought I was being really clever when I put shortcuts to all my games on a diskette, thinking I could then bring all my games anywhere, in my pocket. I realized quickly, however, that the truth was that the shortcuts would only work on my own computer. Not very smart. Anyway, I also played sports and other fun games. I was big into FIFA 97 and 98, as well as NHL 98. I remember playing FIFA 97 for extended periods of time, just slide tackling people in the other team with the rules turned off. I would tackle over and over and laugh at the players getting hurt. It was especially fun when a player would get injured and grab his knee, then get up and limp. I would then swiftly tackle him again and laugh. I was kind of sadistic, huh? Psycho Pinball became my favorite pinball game, plenty better than the other game that came with Windows 95, Space Cadet. It even had mini-games that took place in the scoreboard and you controlled with the flippers and launcher. DX Ball was a favorite of both me and my sister. I didn't know at the time that it was based on Potato's Arkanoid, which is in turn based on Atari's Breakout. A full year after I had discovered Duke Nukem 3D, we went to visit my mom's friend and her son again. This time he had another new game to show me, and it was Command & Conquer Red Alert. This became my new favorite game, and started a period of fascination in real-time strategy games. A classmate suggested that the original Command & Conquer was also good, and it sure was. I preferred Red Alert gameplay-wise, with its better units and planes, etc., but I preferred the original Command & Conquer otherwise. The Commando was such a badass, and when Seth was shot in the head by Kane in full motion video, that was the most shocking thing I've ever seen at the time.
Yes, power shifts more quickly than some people think. I am Kane.
My RTS period continued with Age of Empires and Caesar 2. I tried Warcraft, but even though RTS games are all about clicking, that game didn't really click with me. The next and last RTS I would play a lot was StarCraft. I would play as the Terrans mostly, but I was in awe of the Zerg Queen Sarah Kerrigan and how powerful she was. One overlooked game that I want to give a shout out to is Police Quest 4 Open Season. My sister brought this game to my attention. At first we got hooked on it because it looked like a movie and had voice acting, and it was very interesting doing odd things like touching everyone and just listening to them react. That forensic woman, Chester, she was funny in how uptight she was. If you touched her, she always gave a formed speech about sexual harassment.
Detective Carey, sexual harassment is a violation of federal and state law and of city and department policy.
If you touch her repeatedly in the office, she eventually gets you fired. With the help of a walkthrough, the first one I ever used, we got through the game and solved the case with a serial killer dressing up like a woman when killing his victims. In the end, you found a head in a fridge and killed him with a spray can lighter combo. At the time, this was certainly the most mature game I had played. Then I had a period of liking racing games. It started with Big Red Racing, in which John St. John did voices, which I would find out later. The revolutionary thing for me in that game was how you could stray from the path and drive around the whole track instead of being herded down the road like most other racing games. Moto Racer is the only bike game I've ever played, in 3D at least. I like doing tricks in the dirt track the most. The first and probably only realistic racing game I've ever liked was Need for Speed 2. And even then I had the most fun when using a code to add traffic to the tracks and then running into them. Destruction Derby 2 appealed to me for the same reasons. I've always liked to drive roughly, and this crystallized with Carmageddon. That game was tons of fun, smashing into crazy cars and splattering pedestrians running about. Carmageddon was also great for how you could drive anywhere on the map, and actually racing took a distant backseat to the mayhem and exploring. There was one car that automatically shot out lightning at any nearby pedestrian, killing them instantly. And there was one level with a beach and maybe 200 pedestrians on it, closely huddled together in the water. I remember driving there once in the electric car, but the constant sound of people dying became too much, and it went from funny to disturbing, and I actually felt sick to my stomach. That's the only time I've ever felt like that playing a video game. I still love the game though, but I just didn't do that again. The last big fixation I had in this era was with Grand Theft Auto and GTA London. It was the first game when I got to play as a bad guy. In Carmageddon you were just being crazy, but here you were a criminal. It was refreshing, and the freedom to explore the cities was also great. At the time I didn't think about the limitation in perspective. I had the demo to GTA first, getting to play for 400 seconds before the game would end. Most of the time I would run over people and then try to avoid the police, something that still hasn't gotten old in GTA games. And who can forget Guranga? After playing it I came to prefer GTA London, in part because you could do drive-bys, and I liked the Britishness of the game.
Listen right, we're looking for a lad who can do his stuff. I've heard you're a bit tasty. No.
I remember going to the Buckingham Palace and shooting people with a machine gun, then running from the police as you inevitably have to. The first GTA and London had missions placed in parked cars, something that wasn't used in later ones. One in GTA 1 had a bus. You had to drive slowly but steadily for a good while to avoid it exploding, just like the movie Speed. Trouble was in GTA, as soon as you would hit another car even slightly, you would stop almost completely, and avoiding cars was very hard, so this mission was impossible to do. I had a very good time as a PC gamer, but as time went on, my classmates got new computers, while I did not. So when they were playing Half-Life and Counter-Strike, I was still playing Duke Nukem 3D, Carmageddon and Psycho Pinball. I think that made me appreciate graphics more, since I'd never participated in the race, so to speak. But in 2001 I discovered something that would hold me over until my next computer, while helping me rediscover my earlier childhood anew. In my 8th grade geography classroom there was a computer. It had a game on it, a DOS rip-off of Super Mario platformers. It made me remember Super Mario Bros. 3 and my other Nintendo games. Then of course I also remembered that my NES was lost forever. I told a classmate this, and he said that there's this thing called emulators that you can use to play old video games. He gave me a link, which I tried as soon as I came home on my blazing 56k internet connection. The link was broken, but thanks to the magic of Google, I found both an NES emulator and a ROM site. This was a time of discovery. Thanks to the ROM list I found out that there was in fact 3 more Mega Man games after Mega Man 3, and just overall how many NES games there were out there. I started by reliving my old NES games, mostly Mario 3 and Mega Man 2. I kept my focus on NES in the beginning, then I tried Super Nintendo games. I had played Super Mario World at a store demo as a kid, but now I could play the whole game. And what a game it is. It's my second favorite Mario game after... I turned my attention to the Final Fantasy series, a series that I'd gotten introduced to in school of all places. We had gotten an assignment to write about something, and I chose video games like the little nerd I was. I wrote about the different genres of video games, and I remember putting Carmageddon in a category of its own since it mixed racing and violence. Anyway, I glanced over at a classmate's assignment and he was writing about one game, Final Fantasy VII. He had put in pictures of Cloud, Vincent and Tifa as I recall on his paper, and I was intrigued. It looked cool. When I started emulating later on, PlayStation was out of my computer's league, but I still wanted to try a Final Fantasy game. I downloaded the next newest game I could find, Final Fantasy VI, because my logic was that the newer game would be better than the older ones. A logic that is somewhat less true today. I got into Final Fantasy VI relatively quickly. When I saw that intro with the Magitech armors walking towards the town in the snow, I knew this would be a good game. I also got hooked on the gameplay and its sense of tactics, but I only got as far as Mount Colt before I got stuck. I had just beaten Vargas and then I didn't know where to go. I walked back onto the world map, wandered all around, then gave up. I was being stupid. I didn't realize that I should have walked through the cave opening that Vargas was standing right in front of. In the meantime, I turned to another RPG that I found, Super Mario RPG. This game captivated me and it was a great RPG to start with. In one sitting I played it for 11 hours. That stood as my record for 8 years. After finishing Super Mario RPG, I went back to Final Fantasy VI and got to experience its full glory. Then I played the other Final Fantasies in this order: 1, 4, 5, 3, 2. 3 and 2 I could play thanks to the translator Neo Demiforce. My Super Nintendo emulator had an issue with translucency. It affected games like Mega Man 7 and Rockman and Forte, where the water you're under was solid and you couldn't see Mega Man at all, making the game impossible. And once again my lack of knowledge had made my life harder, because ZSNES did have a function to disable layers, and with that I could have simply turned off the water layer and played it. Overall, how many games there existed out there blew my mind. Growing up, the only systems I knew of were the NES, Game Boy, Super Nintendo, Sega Mega Drive, Sega Game Gear, Commodore 64, and PC. Through the magic of emulation, I found Sega CD, 32X, Neo Geo Pocket, WonderSwan, Atari 2600, TurboGrafx 16, MSX, and many more. Though on my Pentium 166, the most I could emulate was Game Boy Advance on speeds below 80%. PlayStation, as I said, was out of my computer's league, but luckily I bought a real one later on, a modded one that came with some games. Included was Final Fantasy VII, but for some peculiar reason, only discs 2 and 3. I eventually bought Final Fantasy VII used from some housewife, and then played it. Like Super Mario World, it was great, but it didn't overthrow the previous game in the series. But I did have one of my most memorable experiences with Final Fantasy VII. I was fighting Sephiroth, the final boss, and 2 of my 3 characters were confused, Minnie, Toad, Mute and so on. They were unusable. Cloud was immune to status ailments, but only had 300 or so HP and maybe 8 MP. I knew I was nearing the end of the line. I paused the game, took a deep breath, just thinking to myself, I have enough MP for another cure, but Sephiroth will probably just kill me in his next attack anyway. So instead I pressed attack one last time. After finishing Final Fantasy VII, I wanted Final Fantasy VIII, but it was too expensive for me in stores, so I came up with an alternative. I rented the game from a video store, thinking I would rip the games at home and burn them to discs, but I wasn't sure on how to do this back then, so that didn't happen. I then found the game used at a store for cheap, but the discs were very scratched. I bought it anyway, and the clerk was right, it was unplayable. However, I carefully peeled off the rental stickers off the good discs, put them on the scratch disc in the exact same places. Then I returned the scratch disc to the store and kept the good ones. Emulation has many upsides, besides the obvious one. On emulators there's save states, where you can save at any time and don't have to start over at the beginning every time you die. On many emulators there are built-in cheat functions. But mostly thanks to emulation, I've found and played a lot more games that I would have otherwise. Money issues, region locking, and just plain obscurity prevents too many games from being experienced. In 2004 I got a PlayStation 2, and that was also around the time I started to get some of my own money to spend on stuff besides food. That was the starting point of my next age in gaming. The fourth age of my gaming life started when I was at a mall and played a Grand Theft Auto 3 demo at an electronics store. I remember GTA from the PC days, but now it was in full 3D and it was even more fun. I didn't have the money to get a PS2 in those early days, but a friend of mine with more generous parents had the game and I borrowed it from him. I took it with me to a youth center where I played it in their games room. I had cheat codes printed out, and I would enter the code for weapons and then go on a rampage until the police inevitably killed me. Then I would respawn at the hospital, enter the weapons code and do it all again. It was insanely fun, and I lost track of the time. The youth center closed at 11 at night, but with only me in the room I guess they forgot about me. When I looked at my watch it was 1 o'clock. When I went out of the room the alarm rang and I had to take the back door out of there. I also played Tekken Tag Tournament, Tony Hawk 3 and SSX Tricky there on other occasions, without getting locked in. The next year I was visiting my father and went out to an internet gaming cafe, and there I played GTA Vice City for the first time. There, instead of just rampaging, I would jack a motorbike and drive along the beach at night, listening to 80s music. Good times. Then in 2004 I got a PlayStation 2 for a birthday gift, along with Lord of the Rings The Two Towers and Tekken 4. And in 2005 I finally afforded a new computer. And these two systems kicked off some real diversity in my gaming life. My new computer was no powerhouse, but it could still run a good number of games I missed out on for many years, like Half-Life 2 and Max Payne. One series I had curiously read about in gaming magazines but never actually played was Resident Evil. I bought the first 3 games and played on my PS2, and I liked how it reminded me of old adventure games with its exploring, combining of items, and the B-movie style with horrible voiceover that made the game more endearing to me, even though it turned a lot of people off. I finished the first game with 5 seconds to spare, and I still love Brad Vickers for giving me that rocket launcher to kill the tyrant with. When GTA San Andreas was announced, I waited with much anticipation for it. It remains the most awaited game in my gaming life, beaten only by Duke Nukem Forever. But GTA San Andreas, unlike Duke Nukem Forever, did not only meet my expectations, it wildly exceeded them. I've put hundreds of hours on it on all platforms since it came out, and it remains my second favorite game of all time.
I'll have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese, and a large soda.
As time went on, I bought many consoles, even though I sold all of them at a later time due to, needing the money more for food and bills and stuff. Sega Master System, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, Dreamcast, Virtual Boy and Philips CDI. I still have Virtual Boy and CDI, although the ones I have now are my third and second ones, respectively. My most anticipated console was the Nintendo Wii. I really thought that the motion controls were going to be a revolution, and that all games would be controlled by the corresponding real motion. Well, Wii Sports was fun, but not for all that long. Wii Play was the same story, Red Steel was decent at best, but the sword fighting was infuriating and boring, about as immersive as Rock Paper Scissors. Wii games got better later with Resident Evil 4 Wii Edition and Super Mario Galaxy, but to be honest, the best games for the Wii are those who just use motion control to add spice to a game, not those who try to build the games around them. I bought an Xbox 360 later. Saints Row was the first game I had for it, and it's one of the best GTA clones out there. While I waited for GTA 4, I also played Crackdown, in which it's fun to jump and collect orbs, while doing missions felt very bland. Then GTA 4 came out, and made running over pedestrians the most fun it's ever been. I had grown a bit tired seeing the stiff reactions in the previous GTA games. The havoc physics of Saints Row made the bodies fly around like ragdolls, but in GTA 4 they get hit and fall about very realistically, and with more weight to them, and it's a lot of fun. After GTA 4 came 2 more GTA clones, Saints Row 2 and Mercenaries 2. Saints Row 2 is great, almost better than GTA 4. The wackiness that GTA 4 abandoned, Saints Row 2 has in spades, and at times it's actually very well written too, with a character that doesn't give a shit, and side missions where you hose down people and houses with sewage. This is a keeper. Mercenaries 2 on the other hand was a letdown compared to its predecessor. What irritated me the most was that Pandemic promised there would be cheats in the game, but there were none. They announced they would be added in a free update, but then the update didn't come, I hung around their forums for a couple of weeks and they had no information on it. None. I said fuck it and sold the game. Today, I gravitate more towards older games. Most of the new releases that aren't from Nintendo rarely pique my interest very much. A good example of my current mindset is that last year I had some money over and I wanted to buy a console, and I chose to buy a Virtual Boy instead of an Xbox 360. I must have spent thousands of hours of my life playing games. Most people see games as a time-wasting endeavor, but I think any time spent having fun is time well spent. And having fun is why I play games. Still, playing video games is not regarded with the same amount of respect as reading books or watching movies. It's like if you read a lot of books or watch a lot of movies, people can get impressed. But if you play games, you're thought of as a nerd, childish and unserious. It's unfortunate, but I don't think it's going to change anytime soon either. But whatever, I'm just going to keep having fun as long as it's fun. Playing games for 20 years has affected me in a number of ways. As a kid, I learned many English words from games. Words like continue, level, help, world, and many more. I prefer video game music to regular music, and plenty of regular songs I heard first in games such as Grand Theft Auto, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and Guitar Hero. Even some classical music like Tchaikovsky and Offenbach I heard first in video games. For me, the best video game music comes from Final Fantasy, Mega Man, and from Konami, Sunsoft, Technos, and of course, Nintendo. Nowadays, video game music is more about scores than melodies, which is a step down in my book, but it's also understandable since games have gotten a lot more cinematic. I've never been that great at games, and when it got too hard I would either quit playing or cheat. I can say without a doubt that the fact that my mother bought me a Game Genie is one of the reasons I have played games for 20 years. Having fun is fun, but being frustrated and angry isn't. So I'm thankful that Nintendo didn't win its lawsuit against Galoob, so I could at least have the option. But of course I also know that overcoming a seemingly insurmountable challenge is very fulfilling, and recently I've been discovering that more and more. I started watching Game Center CX online. That Arino has the patience of a god, and despite not being that skilled, he presses on. He inspired me to try harder, and I've gotten to feel that feeling of surpassing my own limits. The hardest games I've ever beaten are Mega Man 9, which has such annoying parts that I'm never playing it again, Batman on NES, where the Joker is an exercise in luck, and Castlevania. I played it on the Famicom Disk System, which has saving, and let me tell you that I played Death Stage many times. That hallway with knights and medusas is relentless. Over the last couple of years I've been gravitating a lot more towards retro gaming than current. I think I prefer older games due to them being more pure experiences, more instantly gratifying, and of course nostalgic. No tutorials, no signing into an online profile, little to no loading times. Another reason I go more retro nowadays is that many of my favorite game series have declined over the years. Super Mario is still dependable and Zelda games are still solid, even though they don't grab me in quite the same way as they used to. Mega Man is more or less dead, thanks to Capcom. Resident Evil for me died with Resident Evil 5, and Final Fantasy died with number 10. I've lost interest in the Tony Hawk games, there hasn't been a great Star Wars game since Jedi Academy in my opinion. Grand Theft Auto is still great, but the turn for more cinematic, gritty stories is not quite as great as the more is better wackiness of GTA San Andreas. That said, GTA 5 is my most anticipated game of 2013, no question. And on top of that, there are many games I missed over the years. I've never played a Silent Hill game, any of the Metroid Primes or Dragon Warrior games, among others. I would rather go back and play some of those than try out the new Grey-Brown Shooter or the new Elves and Orcs RPG. Of course, newer games have their advantages too. You get a different kind of immersion and realism. Lately I've been playing the Yakuza series, and it's great. Nothing I could experience on a 2D console. Another advantage to current gaming is online multiplayer, even if I'm far from the biggest fan of it. I've had some good times playing Left 4 Dead 2 with my two bestest internet friends, one from Ireland and one from England. We were playing Left 4 Dead 2 at the advanced difficulty level. We were doing well, kicking zombie ass all over the in-game map. Then in a fit of overconfidence, the Englishman exclaimed, "I think we're ready for expert." The AI director apparently took that as a challenge, and soon thereafter we were all beaten to death by zombies. How ironic. Well, I'm going to keep playing games as long as it's fun, hopefully for the rest of my life. Of course, I will probably have to play less as I get older, but I don't plan to ever stop completely. It's just too much fun for that. Here's to 20 more years in gaming.